So I like to say sometimes there is Jesus again, just pats everybody on the back and tells them they're okay, right? That's what he likes to go around doing all the time. So you can hear that today. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, blind fools. And then he goes on to say, you traverse the sea and the land to make one convert, and when that happens, you make him, the convert, a child of Gehenna. Gehenna is hell. And so we're presented with, on my first reading of this, it's like, the poor person who was converted by the Pharisee was misled. He had a bad teacher. And the Pharisee, he's a child of Gehenna, and now he has a disciple who is twice as bad of a child of Gehenna. Now, whose fault is it? He had a bad teacher. It's a bit of a quandary, isn't it? Woe to you, blind guides. So what I read in this, part of what I read in this is what a tremendous responsibility I have as a pastor, not to be a blind guide, leading people in the wrong direction. That's one thing that slaps me across the face a couple times as I read this. And the other thing is to remind you of your responsibility for your own soul. To have your eyes and ears open. And if somebody's leading you in the wrong way, there is the great symphony of truth. The great symphony of truth. And it all adds up and it all blends together. And when something is wrong, it starts to stick out if we're willing to do a little work and look into it. And what does it mean? And ask questions and seek and knock. So yes, we need leaders, and yes, we need pastors, and yes, we need shepherds, but we also need to keep our brain turned on. I remember a few years ago meeting this gentleman, and he was very proud of himself, at least in this respect, because he told me almost in a puffed up way. He said, I never read anything written before Vatican II. And I said, the Bible was written before Vatican II. I'm like, of all the stupid things in the world to brag about. St. Augustine is a doctor of the church. What does a doctor of the church mean? The word doctor is related to the word doctrine. He's a doctor, he's a teacher. St. Augustine is a teacher that is esteemed by the church. And his book, The Confessions of St. Augustine, should be on every human being's reading list. And it was written before Vatican II, by the way. It should be on every single one of our reading lists. There are so many things that come to us from the past that the church holds up to us, that the church says to us, look to the lives of the saints. Look to the readings of the saints. You might have a bad pastor. You might even have a bad bishop, as sad as it is to say. When Jesus is castigating these Pharisees and the scribes, they're the leaders. And they have been leading Israel astray. And don't think this is isolated to 2,000 years ago. So I would encourage you today as we remember St. Augustine and his incredible journey of his lifetime seeking truth and how he was so lost for so long because he listened to the weakness of his flesh as opposed to the wisdom of the Spirit. And so if I have one word for you to say is You know, if you haven't read the Confessions of St. Augustine or St. Augustine, and maybe we could spend 10 or 15 minutes arguing about how to pronounce that, and then we would get bogged down into some of the silly debates that happen in the world that people call learning. No, let's rise above that. And let's drink deeply from the fountain of wisdom that the church gives us in the lives and the writings of the saints. And then we will be protected against blind guides. And so I have a great responsibility not to be a blind guide, and you have a great responsibility not to be led by blind guides.